In today's Minded Chat, we will dig into BP approach to innovation, and I'm really pleased to have with me today two special guests. Steve Cook, that is the Senior Vice President, Launchpad and Venturing for BP. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Alberto. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming and joining. And then Siobhan Clarke. Siobhan is the operating partner at Launchpad. We already have a very nice, interesting discussion back in May, June timeframe. And I'm really super excited to have you again with me today, because again, in the last 5-6 months, I think there's been a lot of evolution. So we are really spot on. Thank you for Siobhan for being with us today as well.
Real pleasure to be back chatting with you, Alberto.
Okay, so first of all, congratulations are in order. BP has been recognized among the Corporate Startup Stars 2020 for startup, corporate collaboration, and open innovation. So I think congratulations, guys, for the great work and as a group, and specifically as Launchpad you have done. So congratulations.
Thank you, but, and yeah, huge pleasure to receive that. It's great for the team.
Kudos. And Steve, let's start from describing again. BP is a large company, and so let's touch base on the overall approach to innovation. If I got it right, you have an executive vice president for innovation and engineering that has a pretty broad mandate. It is David Eyton. Can you give us a description, which is the overall approach to innovation of BP as a group?
Yeah, absolutely. And to put this in some context, it's worth just pointing out, I think, the magnitude of the shift that we're making in the strategy that BP has. A lot like some of the other major energy companies, we're responding to the need to transition our business into a net zero carbon world. And in February, our CEO, Bernard Looney, announced a brand new purpose and ambition for BP, which really was all about taking the company to a net zero carbon position by 2050 or sooner. And that signals quite a big shift over that period of time in the portfolio that we have and in the way in which we operate our core business. And key to making that transition work is innovation, and obviously that means the delivery of ideas into value and into new businesses. And so in order to recognize the crucial nature and the important nature of innovation in delivering that strategy, what we've done as part of a broader reorganization of the company is to set up a big pillar of our business around what we call innovation and engineering. That organization, as you say, is led by David Eyton. And for the first time, I guess, in BP's 111-year history, it brings together all of our core engineering talent, all of our digital talent in the organization. So not just data science and software engineering, but our digital security and digital infrastructure in the company as well. And it puts it alongside what you might call our traditional R&D organization, our physical science capability, in other words, as well as our safety and operational risk organization, which keeps the organization safe in a physical sense. And that's very dependent on a lot of technical expertise. And it puts all of that together with the commercial innovation capability, which I guess I have the privilege at the moment of looking after, what we call Launchpad and Ventures. So when you put all of those things together, for the first time, you have the ability not just to connect with the global ecosystem around innovation in various different parts of the world, and draw on our partnerships, our relationships with the startup community, our relationships with universities, partners, and everything else that we do, as well as our internal R&D. But to bring forwards those ideas through from concept to testing, and then to delivery of new businesses at scale. So that's the idea that we're pursuing with innovation in BP.
It's quite a broad approach, and again, there are probably just very, very limited example, at least looking at oil and gas company, but not also going beyond oil and gas company that put R&D, ICT, digital, and innovation under the same roof, let's say, because again, there are some very, very large component in terms of size. I'm referring to R&D, sometimes also ICT, that tends to be put together with innovation, typically are definitely more tinier units. If you put all of them under the same roof, again, yes, they are all equal, but some are definitely larger than others. So how this is working, what the opportunity is obviously big.
Yes.
But what problem you might foresee or you are experiencing, again, because it's just started?
So there's huge opportunity in putting these capabilities together, because what it does is it allows you to have cross-functional teams working on ideas, so that you can have a very fluid and frictionless flow of ideas around a different set of capabilities that you need to realize business value from what we're doing. As you say, I mean, this is thousands of people coming together globally, and any organization that size has the potential for complexity. But I think what helps us is the clarity of strategy and the focus that we have in the various different growth areas that we are targeting. And that's been something which has been developed over the past 2, 3, 4 years in the company. So we're quite clear on where we're going from a strategy point of view, and the role we'd like innovation to play in that. And also, I think the ways in which we are designing the organization and the way in which we're working helps us. Rolling out sort of formal agility practices across that whole organization enables us to much more fluidly move capability to where the work is and where the skills are needed. And in the process of doing that, we've removed a number of layers of hierarchy from the organization. So we have a much flatter organizational structure, a much more agile organizational structure, and a much clearer strategy to play off, if you like.
And no clash of cultures, again, that might be.
There is always legacy in any, and especially in a large organization like BP, which has got over 100 years of incumbency. We have many different subcultures, like any organization. But again, the opportunity of resetting the company, it's pretty disruptive, it has to be said, happening all at once. But it does give us the opportunity to reset the culture as much as resetting the wiring of the organization, if you like. And so there's a very deliberate focus on how we want the culture to be across innovation, and how we want that to be common across that group of people. So, I mean, it's going to be a work in progress for quite some time. And you're absolutely right. There are always legacy cultures, but a common strategy and a common approach really helps sort of mitigate against that.
Yeah, again, that's until you try, it's difficult to change anything. So I think and by the way, it looks to me that it's becoming quite a trend, also not just for the oil and companies, but also other corporates that are definitely following suit in this direction. Moving from organization to actions, again, when we talk about open innovation, startup collaboration, there are different pillars. One is startup acceleration, another one is startup procurement, the so-called venture client model. Another one is our investments, and eventually acquisition, M&A. Can you walk us through, before opening the door, to what specifically Launchpad is focused on?
Yeah, sure. And it's easy to describe these things as a linear process, and of course it's never linear, and that's why an integrated set of capabilities is really important. So we recognize that, but in simple terms, we look at where ideas come from, and the bias in the organization in BP is to make sure we're as sort of democratic as possible about if you like, origination or ideation in the company, recognizing that ideas can come from inside the company, can come from our connections with customers and partners. They can come from people in our operations who are looking at specific pain points or opportunities. They can come from the public. They can come from all kinds of different places. So it's important that we have a very wide aperture in terms of ideation. But then as we move from ideation into incubation, into testing of those ideas and validating those ideas, I think what we've learned actually even over the past few months, as we've been designing this organization and learning from what we've done in Launchpad, is that having a more structured approach to in a hypothesis design, hypothesis testing at a really early stage, so that we don't put huge amounts of growth capital into ideas that are not going to make it, is really, really important. So, we've centralized what we're doing around incubation in the organization and started to build a more disciplined practice around that within BP. And then you look at how you invest in some of those ideas. If those ideas look promising, and you've reached a first customer or two, some early adopters, then the next big problem is how you then take those ideas from early adoption to mass market. And obviously that's where the real value comes at the end of innovation, is building these things up into scale. So that's where Launchpad comes in as part of the equation there. That's our internal business building capability, which Siobhan helps to run. And she can talk a lot more about that. But that's really designed to take us from early adoption to mass market in what you might call digital adjacencies. So digitally led business options that are a step out from our core. And then alongside that, we've also got our corporate venture capital activity. And
that is BP Ventures.
That's BP Ventures. So, and that's another mechanic that we can use to participate in growth of startup companies as a minority player in this case, but also access their solutions and products. And then, of course, where you've got kind of new businesses which are dependent on more capital-intensive physical process technologies. So, maybe that's hydrogen production, or it's geothermal, or it's carbon capture and storage, or biofuels process plants. Those things we can scale using our existing capabilities in major projects and capital project delivery in the rest of the BP organization. So there are a number of different pathways that an idea can take through those different capabilities. But, for the first time, we have them all in one place.
Very cool. So let's open a bit, remove the spotlight from the overall organization, a bit more on Launchpad. And Siobhan, when we discussed a few months ago, again, you provided us a quite comprehensive picture of what Launchpad was up to. I think might be important to understand a bit better how Launchpad does work, and specifically what has changed in the past few months. And again, it's very, very telling that an initiative that is quite fresh and new has evolved and changed so much in just such a short time frame. And I think it's probably the perfect representation of how today corporates are learning from the startup lean approach, also to have the ability to reshape the tools that they have put together as they see working, as they see fit, because it's something, again, they build the plane while flying sometimes, and sometimes you notice that something is missing or something is not exactly the best way to do it, and you change it. I think it's very, very telling, the fact that also the evolution that you've done. So can you navigate through Launchpad a bit?
Yeah, sure, Alberto. And it's almost like building on the back of what Steve was saying. We've gone, we're 5-6 months, I think, since we last spoke, Alberto. And at that point, Launchpad was in some ways this part of the business that was an accelerator, that was kind of incubation. And then there was this, if we think about this holistic cycle of business building, there's a balance between what are you incubating and creating and testing as hypothesis. And at that time we talked with, it was Vive, it was Mike Capper was kind of having the conversation with us. And then there is the second component, which is really adding much more energy into the cycle, which is around actually scaling that particular business. And back at that point, I think we had 4 portfolio companies. You know, we do have 5 announcements. I'm sure will be coming on who the 5th one is that we're adding to that portfolio. And then, so that's on the scaling side, and we will add another 5 over the next kind of 12 months. So we're pretty excited about what we're seeing in the market and where our investment thesis is kind of leading us. And on the second one, if I come back to this, the acceleration, the incubation kind of component, this very early stage business building, we recognize the huge importance in this, in that we decided to even craft that out even further, give it its own kind of a VP for incubation. So we've had a new person kind of come in and join the business, and Steve can talk to the individual who's kind of running that. We're really excited about him and what he's already adding in terms of value, what he's already driving in terms of a hypothesis and very commercial driven approach to testing kind of those ideas and testing companies before they apply to kind of come into Launchpad. That separation, I think, is something that we've learned over that time. So if you remember, we were talking about what is it that we are bringing to this business scaling model that is different. And one of those aspects was, there were 2 aspects to it. One was about the acceleration advantage that BP kind of adds. How do we support the companies that are growing through the relationships, through the connections, through the insights that BP has? And then the second one was about, have we supporting those companies that are coming in with people who've done this before?
Yep.
So we talked at that time about a number of practices that we have in Launchpad around people, technology, operations, growth, and finance. So people who have scaled know what it takes to scale businesses, and having them lend their expertise into the teams and the portfolio. And just during the last number of months since we last spoke, I think we've added maybe 10 to 15 people to that team. We've onboarded them completely remotely. Some of us have not met each other yet because of the times in which we're in, but we're really super excited about bringing that team, bringing that kind of the portfolio and everything together when we're in better times.
How's the size of the pure Launchpad, the scaling part of the business? How many people are you now?
Yeah, we're about 35 to 40 people at the moment, okay. Alberta. So we separate, and that's excluding, you know, we do have a ventures team and we do have an incubation team, and all of that kind of sits within the Launchpad and ventures. But on the scaling side, it's about 35 to 40 people, where 80% of the time for that people is actually spent with the portfolio companies, helping them to scale. There is a tiny origination team, and this is back to the point that Steve was talking about. We're democratic about where ideas and where companies kind of come from. So leveraging across Launchpad and Ventures this idea of the collective origination, this idea by a company comes forward or an idea to solve a particular problem, and where is the best mechanism in order to be able to support its growth? Is that a minority shareholding? Is that it's very early stage, and so we have to drive out some hypothesis around it? Is it that we're close to product market fit, and actually this is not ready for scaling? So there are multiple mechanisms that we have in place to be able to support those ideas in their ability to impact the world.
And which is the minimum? Again, there is no obviously a single entry door, but what are the criteria to be qualified to entering the Launchpad, the scaling part of the business? What are the criteria when a company is out of incubation, or an idea that is also coming from outside is ready to be scaled by you guys?
And there are two lenses that we look at that, Alberto. One is around strategic, And the second one is obviously around financial and kind of return. And those are the two things that we hold ourselves accountable to, and we hold ourselves and have kind of the rest of BP hold us accountable to. So the first one, on the strategic one, is really about, does this have the potential to become a future business unit for BP? Does this have some kind of an alignment to what Steve was talking about, the digital adjacencies? Does this company that's coming through align to our investment thesis, which will grow? We have two core areas today, but that will grow over time. So is it aligned strategically to the way that we see the world evolving? And then the second one is financially. So is the company at the right point where we can actually see an ability to get to 250 million of revenue in 3 to 5 years? And it can do that with the backing and the support from the practices and the platform team and the experience we've built within Launchpad, but also the backing and the support from BP on that. So all the usual stuff around venture scaling applies in that capacity. So do we have an incredible, passionate team that just loves to solve this particular problem? Do we have technical or some kind of USP or knowledge that is differentiated from something else that we see that is out there? And do we believe in the problem that they're trying to solve? Is it big enough in order to be able to create something truly kind of unique? So those would be the two, the strategic.
But is a collective choice that is taken inside Launchpad as a sort of consortium of operating partner? Is something that involves also the business unit? How does it work?
Yeah, so we separate out into kind of two layers, if you want. And this has been one, if you look at the VC world, they run in terms of their investment committees and the partners kind of making those decisions. Exactly. Yeah. So within Launchpad, we've set up a similar construct in order to be able to support both us as Launchpad, so the operating partners, and there's an investment committee. So the origination team still brings those ideas to that investment committee. And then to ensure that we are connecting strategically to the business within BP, we do have a second stage that the operating partners have responsibility of then taking that within the I&E investment committee. And that's kind of an important evolution, if you want, from where we were 6 months ago as well. The reason why we do that is that we really do believe in the BP unique advantage. So we want to be able to bring something to allow us to have the conversation at the most senior levels in the organization about, we're backing this company to be one of the biggest ones to win this particular space. We want the backing of BP to sit behind that as well.
Can I chip in there?
Yes, because
just to add to what Siobhan was saying, which is we do have the benefit, I guess, of having done corporate venturing for the past almost 15 years now. So we're used to operating in that way, and the BP organization understands that when you make an initial investment in one of these kinds of companies, you're making a multi-year commitment potentially, and so with that comes not just the commitment for the initial amount of funding, but potentially at least the moral commitment to follow through with further rounds of investment. And that is also true in Launchpad. And so that's why we've got that sort of very senior level commitment through the investment committee that Siobhan was just talking about, because we need to be convinced that we are in it for the long term, and therefore prepared to put the growth capital in to support these companies potentially over a number of years to reach some scale.
Now, this is a good point. I want to go back, Steve, with you, because it's not a question, but a follow-up, because I forget, because I'm an old man and then I start forgetting my questions. You say you have 35 to 40 people, Siobhan, currently in Launchpad for supporting how many portfolio companies?
So we have 4 companies right now in Launchpad, but we are literally onboarding our 5th as we speak. So essentially 5, and then we've got, as Siobhan says, line of sight into another 4 or 5 into next year.
So substantially, the ratio, again, assuming that might be a ratio for, again, you have been one of the award winners. So again, people just looking at you as more as a benchmark and say, so the ratio for properly supporting is, let's say, 35, 40 people for servicing 5, that might be extended portfolio to maybe 8, 10 companies. So that is the ratio.
Well, I think this is, so I wouldn't, first of all, Alberto, I would not pretend that we are not still learning about what the model needs to look like.
No silver bullet are available. We know that. So, you know.
I mean, we're delighted to accept the award, but we're still learning. And so, you know, it's not a linear scaling, obviously, of people to things in the portfolio. So we don't necessarily expect that core team of 40 people to expand in a linear way as we bring in another 4 or 5 companies, because as we build the portfolio, you're going to have different companies at different stages of maturity in those journeys as we go along. So what we find, and I guess it's obvious to say this, but in the very early stages, as we first bring companies into Launchpad, then they need a lot more of that support from the central team. But as they mature and as they grow their own capabilities, then we become more of a critical friend to those companies, supporting them, advising them, but not quite so hands-on as we perhaps were at the start of their journey. So as you balance that out over time, you start to get to a steady state, and we think that's somewhere between 10 and 15 things in the portfolio at any given time.
Yeah, but still, the main message is again is a sizable team for supporting a quite limited number of portfolio. That is not huge again. So that means that there is a lot of work behind that. And then we are talking about numbers. Then there is also the quality of the people and the profile of the people involved. That is the other core component.
And that's
I'd like to dig a bit into. Yes.
Yeah, it's a hugely important point, Alberto. And we, I guess we've been unashamedly recruiting only the best people we can find. And if that takes a little bit longer for us to do that, then that's okay. And I think one of my big learnings personally, as we built Launchpad over the past 2 years, is just how important it is not only to attract the right kind of talent, but then to be able to set the culture and the environment in the right way, such that talent can not only succeed as individuals, but can form really world-class teams very rapidly. Because there's nothing that drives the scaling of new companies faster and in a more compelling way than having amazing teams. And as Siobhan was saying earlier, a lot of what you're investing in is the team, because especially at early stages, these companies are likely to pivot in a number of different ways before they find their sweet spot. So it's that team building, the organizational design, the culture, the leadership development that's so important. And if I would do anything differently about what we did in Launchpad, I would probably have made the head of talent that we have in Launchpad one of our first hires rather than one of the later hires we made in the process. So yeah, it's really important.
And so talking about you have recruited a lot of team members from outside the BP. Which is the percentage, again, out of these 40 people currently in Launchpad, how many are coming from outside BP?
Do you want to speak to that, Siobhan?
I think it'd be at least 80%, but it might even be higher, about 90%. All of them with experience of scale up. So somewhere between a seed and Series D of scale up. And it's, as each new person has kind of, this is almost speaking to the point that Steve is going, is each new person has joined the team. They've brought a different insight in scaling. And that insight has been really useful into a particular portfolio company. That phenomenon, and maybe even to the point of like I see it on the recruitment side, I see it on the tech side, the machine kind of learning expertise that we brought in, and how that supports and helps to drive some of the portfolio companies in a different way around how they think about tech. On the recruitment side, like we're expanding out, because if you're rapidly growing as a team, as a portfolio company, and you're scaling, you're effectively kind of building out your own set of sustainability. So you're creating kind of leadership teams in place and setting them to go higher as well to deliver against a growth plan. So the recruitment is more than just finding kind of that person, it's the cultural aspect of kind of adding that into it. It is building into a community. And I think what's also one of the more interesting things is that we have created, over the last 6 months, I've seen around the practices, a creation of communities of expertise between the portfolio companies and Launchpad. The example being, the head of talent from Launchpad then supports what is kind of 5 different heads of talent in the portfolio companies, and they come together and say, what is your next thing that you need to do in the next 2 months? Oh, hey, yeah, actually, we've already done that here. Let me share that with you. Let me share you the approach. Let me share that learning. And because you're doing that immediately, you're doing that with someone who's just a little bit ahead of you, that helps to scale faster the portfolio as a whole.
And I just wanted to add something to that, Alberto, which is whilst 80% of the people that we've hired into Launchpad have come from outside of BP, it's still really important that we have that 20% from within BP, because as Siobhan was saying, one of the things that makes Launchpad competitively advantaged versus a standalone financial VC or private equity house is that we're able to draw on some of those advantages from the BP organization, whether that's domain expertise, whether it's the internal market inside BP, whether it's our relationships in many different countries around the world, or advantage supply chains. I guess evidently those things are like gold dust to a normal startup. And if we can't reach back into the BP organization, take those things and provide them into our portfolio companies, then we're just migrating into being a financial fund. And, we're not as advantaged as we could be. And so that the ability to have our cake and eat it, I don't know if that translates very well, but live in the best of both worlds, right? The best of BP with the best of the startup world. That's the world that we are constantly striving to live in Launchpad.
Yeah, I think I might add, there is, again, one of the biggest learning working innovation inside corporates is that corporate politics still matter. And so you need people that know how to navigate inside a corporation. And so sometimes when you move the bar too much into the entrepreneurial, you risk to not at the end not to achieve anything, because you need also someone that is able to leverage your biggest asset. I believe one of the major advantages, this is a discussion we're having with many CVCs, corporate venture capital unit, that are trying to become a sort of independent VCs. And that is quite a strong trend, particularly for the banks, is something that we are seeing.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, I understand, because they have probably the ambitions to become among the category leaders. But on the other hand, if you are not able to leverage your largest asset, that is having a parent company behind you that you can really exploit, sort of use prima noctis, first in advantage. Yes. At the end, I believe you are missing something, and you're trying to go together with the other to join the bandwagon and to lose your main asset. At the end, again, for corporate lives like you, it's complicated to be exploited, but if you can, I think it means something.
It's hard work, though, and I wouldn't pretend it's anything other than really hard work to make that a success. And it's always tempting to either come off of that position and fall on one side or the other and say, oh, it'd be so much easier if we were just part of the corporate innovation system in BP wholly, or it'd be so much easier if we just cut ourselves loose and created a fund. Our lives would be much easier, but I don't think that we would get the kind of results that ultimately we're looking for here, because the model is potentially transformational, and we try and keep our eyes on that prize whilst whilst fighting the inevitable daily battles.
Yeah, again, adding the mentorship.
It wouldn't be as much fun either. I think part of the fun, Alberto, and I think that's part of the reason why, we've got this phenomenal kind of recognition from you that sees so many different models out there, is that we're willing to take on this struggle between the power of both. And we're willing to kind of find the way through that. So as Steve was saying, in some ways it could be easier just to fall on one side or the other. But why would you? Because you lose something in that capacity. Yes, that does make it a little bit harder sometimes. Yes, that makes it frustrating on some days. But ultimately, that's the bit, by challenging some of these conceptions head on, by picking the hard struggle on the way through, I think that's ultimately what is going to drive a different set of success here.
Yeah, it's definitely a good battle to be fought, and I think it's the right one, again, for working for a large corporation. And I think it's I think from an external perspective, the part that has been again impressed again from the conversation we had, from my knowledge of what you guys are doing, is the level of ambition that you put behind the Launchpad, but not only Launchpad tool, but also the strong willingness to try to put in connection with again the main asset that is the parent company behind you. And that is, I think, is not a walk in the park, but I think is the right walk to be taken, again, if you want to exploit where you're sitting on, because again, if not, you probably should do a different job.
Yeah.
Going back, Steve, that's just my 2 cents, but just a comment talking about relationship with the business unit. I was particularly interested to understand which is the relationship between the decision of involving a startup, might be investing into the startup, or might be also procuring services, products from a startup, and the business unit. What is the involvement of the business unit? When the business units are involved, they have a veto power, they should be consulted. How does it work inside BP?
Yeah, and again, this is an evolving story, and we've learned a lot over the past few years from our ventures organization about kind of what works and what doesn't. And so it's really important that we engage with our operating businesses, or the relevant bit of the company that has an interest in the technology and the outcome, or in the solution that the company that we're investing in provides, because what that opens up for us obviously is a source of strategic value. So we have this ability to extract value from the return on investment, just like a financial VC would do. But then because we have this corporate internal market, we can also extract another layer of value, which we call strategic value, from the deployment of these products and solutions that we have favorable access to by virtue of the investment that we make in these companies, and deploying that into our assets. So unless we engage with the operating businesses at a really early stage and take them through not just the investment process, and their sponsorship of a particular investment is a very important part of the discussion we have as we're looking to make the investment. But it's really important that that conversation and that engagement continues beyond the investment into the holding period, if you like, of those companies in the portfolio. Otherwise, the actual hard work of connecting those companies into the BP, the complexity of the BP operating organization, then you don't realize the value. So what we tend to do in Launchpad is we tend to have a board representative on the board of directors for the companies from the operating business, from the relevant operating business. So, for example, in Onyx, which is one of the companies we have in Launchpad, which is focused on the wind sector and providing predictive maintenance for wind, we have somebody from the BP wind business sitting on the board of Onyx. And likewise, in the venture portfolio, we tend to have the formal board directorship held by a member of the ventures team, but then an observer seat populated by the relevant person from the operating business. So you have that connectivity, the sense of ownership, which connects the relevant business in BP into that startup company. Now, for some of the companies, their promise is some way further out over the horizon. So there's a balance in the portfolio of companies that can produce something for our businesses today versus companies that maybe can produce a solution in the future. And for the more step out ones, then there sometimes is not an obvious operating business that has an interest, and so we tend to sponsor that from within the broader innovation organization. But then as those things develop and it becomes more obvious where the use cases are, we start to bring in the operating businesses at that point in time.
You study and over, yes. Yeah, so the obvious question is CVC model, on a model that have a strong involvement with business units, that on the one help a lot in aligning and also pursuing definitely more potential of scalability inside the group. Obviously, that sometimes bring the horizon of investment closer to today's business rather than the business of the future. So talking in mostly close to H1, H2 rather than H3. And so how do you balance? That was my next question, but you already answered. So
well, I mean, just to build on that answer a little bit. So that's one of the big roles of our investment committee sitting across innovation and engineering is that we have, for example, our corporate strategy, somebody senior from our corporate strategy group is represented on the investment committee. And so the connection into the, all bits of the timeline in our corporate strategy is really important. So the portfolio view that is provided to that investment committee allows us to make some of those trade-offs and make some of those balancing points in the portfolio. So, whilst we have a number of investments in startup companies that are delivering value into our businesses that operate today, we also have made investments in next generation battery technology, for example, with a company called StoreDot in Israel. We have a methane to protein company called Callista in the portfolio. We have investments in cognitive and AI companies that are only just starting to deliver proofs of concept across the business. So, we can demonstrate a range of different kind of time horizons across the portfolio. But it is, I agree, it's something that you need to be constantly watching because the temptation is always to draw it to the near term where you can see the money.
Today is today, tomorrow is always tomorrow, and sometimes people are a bit less interested. Looking at tomorrow, I think one part that I was pretty excited about was the separation of incubation from the scaling part. Again, you typically have a sort of draw line between the part that you call 0 to 1 and the part that you call the 1 to 100. And so focusing a bit more on the part 0 to 1, which is the current structuring for the incubation acceleration part.
So I'll maybe say a couple of words about how it is today, but then maybe Siobhan can say a couple of words about why we got there and the journey over the past few months with Launchpad, because we've shifted our position on that. And where we stand today is we've created a separate capability that runs across the whole of BP to sort of centrally manage our incubation capability. So we now have an incubation group which is run by one of many really exciting hires that we've made recently. His name is Justin Lewis. He comes out of Tesla, and then prior to that was at Google. So, some of these people who have in career choices in some of the most exciting companies around the world are choosing to work for BP, and that's exciting for us because they can see the impact that they can have globally on a massive once-in-a-generation transition that the energy system is going through. So Justin is looking after incubation for us, and what he brings is a really rigorous and focused approach to early stage testing of new business ideas, and that really hinges around hypothesis creation and hypothesis testing. So he calls our incubation capability a failure factory, because we expect 90% of the things that go through that process to not make it. And I think, like any other corporate, I would assert, we have been guilty in the past of pursuing pet projects and spending, many, many millions of dollars on things that could have been screened out much earlier. So that's where we stand right now. I don't know, Siobhan, if you want to say where we've come from on that.
I think we've come kind of a long way. I mean, we talked about this in terms of the vibe on our last kind of conversation. What's probably more interesting about where we're going to go is that in 6 months' time, even if I tell you what that kind of looks like now, I am sure that it will be different. And there's kind of something exciting about that, because I see a portfolio of really interesting ideas that will come into Launchpad for scale. And I also see that we're going to constantly review the way that we're kind of looking at these businesses. And the more that we talk about it as well from an origination standpoint and where the ideas are going to come from, I think we're going to hear from different sets of entrepreneurs, from different types of businesses than what we've maybe connected with in the ecosystem over the last 12 months.
Just again, since we are getting close to the end of our conversation, final question about this incubation unit. How many people do we have in the incubation unit currently?
So it's a baby organization right now, and so Justin is busy building his team. So it's a literal handful of people right now. Okay. But what we do is we draw really heavily on the rest of the organization, particularly our digital organization, and some of our businesses to build those teams. So it's at the moment it's directed and coordinated by Justin and a handful of people. That's growing over time, but we don't think we need to have it hugely resource intensive in order to make it work effectively.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so I think we are done. Final question for you guys with a short answer is if you need to set up one KPI for each of you, and as an organization and personally, what this could be?
Revenue and enterprise value growth. Simple.
And I would have something on there about speed of hiring, pace of hiring, to add to what Siobhan said. Cool.
So guys, thank you very much for the time. Again, it's been a very, very interesting conversation. Since we are evolving so fast, I booked you guys for in 6 months to touch base and see what has been changed and what you guys have learned and what we can learn from you. So congratulations again for your award, and keep up with the good work.
Many thanks, Alberto.